So, if you could ask God one question right now, what would it be? Have you ever pondered that? I'm curious, what would some of your all's questions be? You might want to share, shout them out. What would your question be? Nothing. Speechless because God's in front of you. I understand that. So after you overcome that, then what would you ask? I love that. What is your plan for me? And that I would have a bunch of follow-up questions after that, but that's a great one question ask. What else? You gotta pick on Coach Calipari, Coach Cal. Is he cheating? Or is he doing it the right way?
I don't know the answer to that.
What else? Yeah, okay. Who really killed JFK? That's a perfect one, right? Why? I love that. Why is there so much needless suffering in the world? Great question.
So, what? Why?
So,
why do you choose me?
So sometimes you feel like you just don't quite have what it takes, and when you feel called to something, when you feel like God's calling you a direction, you feel unqualified, unworthy, and you're like, why me? Why are you picking me for this? That's a great question. Yeah. So why do good things happen to bad people? Why do they always seem like somehow they're being blessed in some way? All right, so these are all good questions, all right? And it would be hard. I only get one. I need to think about this for a minute. What's my one question going to be? The number one question, if you were to poll people, the number one question that would be asked would be, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? I think sometimes we get that bad things happen to bad people. They get what they deserve, right? But why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen in general? Why is there senseless suffering? I mean, let's think about it. There's tsunamis and tornadoes and earthquakes. You have disease, cancer, people born with disabilities. We have death that we have to deal with at any time in our life. We can somewhat cope with it if we're passing in our 80s and 90s. That seems fair, okay? But anything prior to that is, it's just too soon. But we're dealing with death. Kids being abducted, starving, homeless people, abortion, school shootings, terrorist attacks. The list can go on and on. Why do these bad things happen? Where are you, God? Why aren't you doing something? And for many of us, that can be a deal breaker. For many of us, somebody may say, I want to believe, I want to, but God just seems to be this heartless person that doesn't care, this heartless God. And therefore, I can't believe in a God that would do that. Well, I would start off and say this, that logic doesn't make sense to me, okay? To not believe in a God because he's quote-unquote heartless or doesn't care, that's kind of a stupid comment in a way. Because either he exists or he doesn't exist, right? You can be angry that he's heartless. You can be angry that he doesn't seem to do anything about it. But being angry and being an atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God, being angry versus being an atheist are two totally different things. And I don't know how you could come to the conclusion that he's mean, therefore I don't believe in him. Okay, I used to get on my kids when they were younger, and I used to correct them and punish them and things like that. And I don't think they ever went to school and somebody asked about their dad, and they went, I don't believe in my dad. He doesn't exist. Why? Because he's mean. He doesn't care about me. That doesn't make sense, okay? So the same should be that way with God. That shouldn't determine if you believe in him or not. Maybe how you believe in him. I think that makes sense. But it's different to be angry versus being a non-believer or an atheist. So I think we've already talked about that why we believe in God, and we've given evidence for that and those types of things. But just a quick recap of why, as Christians, we believe what we believe, why we follow Jesus, why we follow Christ, why we believe in God. The first thing I think for many of us is we don't see how something can come from nothing. I mean, think of creation. Go all the way back to creation. What was before the earth and the universe and everything? What was before that? Nothing. Well, what made the universe and the world and us and all this stuff? Nothing made something. That does not compute, okay, right? Nothing can't make something. Therefore, there has to be a first cause, right? We know about cause and effect. There has to be a first cause. Something to cause that. But it's beyond our understanding, because then if I go, well, there's a first cause, well, I go, well, what caused that? Well, what about that? Well, who created God? It's just, you can't comprehend it. We can't take it in. It is beyond science, whether you believe in God or not. Something from nothing, that's beyond science. That is beyond nature. That is beyond natural law. So therefore, it must be supernatural. Right? And when we think of supernatural or a supernatural something or a supernatural being creating, and then the world existing after that, we believe as Christians that that is God. Okay, well, why do we believe that it's God and not something else? Okay, why God? Why a supernatural being that created the earth? For me, and probably for many of you, it's because Jesus believed in God. Now, I know you may say, well, that sounds silly. Listen, Jesus believed in God. Jesus, the reason why I give him a lot of credit, okay, is because he did numerous miracles. Healing the sick, raising people from the dead, changing water to wine, feeding the 5,000 with just a few things. He did all kinds of miracles. Then he predicts his death and resurrection. He died on a cross and he rose. And there were witnesses all over the place to see all of this take place. And they documented it historically. They documented it. And then it was collected, all these different manuscripts and pieces of documentation from different people, eyewitnesses, and they pulled it together, and we have the Bible. If a guy predicts his death and resurrection, and it happens, I'm believing anything that guy says. Anything. Again, eyewitness accounts. People saw this happen. The fact that we're talking about it 2,000 years from when it happened is unfathomable. So if Jesus, who whatever he says is, if he says there's a God, then I believe it. I believe it. All throughout Scripture, Jesus talks about God. In all of his teachings and everything. He talks about how God gave his one and only Son. God did. We can read about that in John 3:16. He encourages us to pray to the Heavenly Father. We can find that in Matthew 6. And in John 5, he talks about that if you believe in Moses, and if you believe what Moses wrote down, which are earlier books in the Old Testament, if you believe what he wrote, then you should believe in me. If you don't believe in what he wrote, you shouldn't believe in me. But if you believe that, then you should believe in me. And of course, he died and rose again. So you can guarantee I'm going to believe what Moses wrote. And what did Moses write about? He wrote about the fact that God created the earth in 6 days. So when people sit there and go, well, did Genesis, when it talks about the creation account, was it a literal 6 days? Yes, it was a literal 6 days. And he rested on the seventh. Literally. Why do you believe that? How can you believe that? Because Moses wrote that down. And Jesus said that if you believe in Moses, you believe in me. If you believe in me, then you believe in Moses and what he wrote. And guess what? I died and rose again. Who do you believe? I believe the dead guy that rose again. And there is a God. And he created the earth in 6 days. He refers to God, and he refers to the Old Testament all throughout his teachings in the New Testament. So when you sit there and you go, well, is the Bible true or is it a bunch of fairy tales? It's true. To the T, every single bit of it. Adam and Eve, is that really true? Yes. Because Jesus talked about it in the book of Matthew. If you just look at the book of Matthew and see how much Jesus referred to the Old Testament, the people of the Old Testament, then you have to believe the Bible to be 100% true. Why? Because the dead guy rose again, said so. That's why. He talks about Cain murdering Abel in chapter 23. He talks about Noah and the ark and the animals. He refers to Noah in chapter 24. Many of you are familiar with Sodom and Gomorrah and how there was sin all throughout that city and God destroyed that city. Do you really believe it's true, or was he just teaching something? No, it really happened. Why? Because the dead guy who rose again said so in chapter 10. Okay, well, what about Jonah and that big fish? Did the big fish really eat Jonah? Did he really stay in his belly for several days and then he got spit out? I mean, I remember that in the Pinocchio movie. Are you sure? Yes, we're sure. Why? Because the dead guy who rose again said so in chapter 12. So this is just to start the argument of what we believe and why we believe. You all have been to many of the teachings that we've had on Wednesdays about reconnecting science and God and that they can coexist, right? The evidences for God. So those are just to name a few. So listen, I believe because of all those things. Does that mean God does not exist because there's cruel stuff happening in the world? No. You may be mad because he's heartless and doesn't care. That's fine if you come to that conclusion. But I'm going to try to talk you out of that. Because the next question would have to be, why then, if God exists and created everything and seemed to care about it and care about us, why then does he allow bad things to happen? We think, you know what? You know what God should have did? Have you ever thought about what you would do if God put you in control and said, fine, you create the earth and everything and people, and I'm going to give you the power to do that. You do that. How would you create it? Now, some of you are creative, but let's just get to the point of pain and suffering. I'm pretty sure that when we would create the earth, we would create it without pain and suffering, right? Wouldn't you? Or would you sprinkle that in there somewhere? Anybody? No pain and suffering, right? So why didn't God do that? He did. He did. Genesis chapter 1. God created everything, and it says, then God looked over all he had made and saw that it was very good. It was perfect. They didn't want for anything. There was no pain, no suffering, no talk of death until the fall of man. Until Adam and Eve. Until they ate the forbidden fruit. Do you really believe in Adam and Eve? In the forbidden fruit story? And that's how sin came to the world? Yes, because the dead guy who rose again referred to Adam and Eve. So yes, I do. It's a fallen world. So now the world is broke. The world is jacked. Now we've got sin. We continue to sin. We continue to make bad choices. The way that the world functions scientifically, when you think about weather and things that cause death, it's broke now. We broke it. Have you ever had a kid that just got a toy and they broke it? That's what Adam and Eve did. Oh, this is awesome. And they broke it. Good job. Right? They broke it. So why do bad things happen? Why is there suffering in the world? I'm going to tell you that it has to do with free will, a lot of it. Free will from the time of Adam and Eve. But here's some examples of free will and consequences that come with free will. Okay, so think about pain and suffering. If you touch a stove that's burning, if you touch a stove, what's going to happen? You are going to burn yourself. Now you can be mad and burn yourself and go, God, you son of a, yeah, look. Right? The finger starts throbbing. You're like, come on. You can be mad, but you touched it. What do you expect? What if you don't study for a test? What's going to happen? You're going to fail the test. Unless you're being brilliant, you're just going to, pass right, which is not true. I was only as smart as the kid next to me when I didn't study. What happens if you don't eat healthy? If you eat cheeseburgers every day and all kinds of other food, what's going to happen? You're going to get big, right? You're going to gain weight. What else is going to happen? Yeah, your arteries are going to clog up. You're going to have all kinds of problems. So if I, who appears to be a skinny guy, dies tomorrow because my arteries are clogged, because I eat a bunch of junk, we can't sit there and go, God, why did you let him go? Why? We can't. It's his fault. He had the Big Macs every day. Tell him to stop. Smoking, working a lot. If we work a lot and we don't have a good relationship with our kids or a good relationship with our spouse, is that because God didn't come through in your marriage? No, it may be because you work too much. And that's all you focus on is making money and worry about retirement or whatever the case may be. That's it. Well, my marriage is ruined and everything. Yeah, you cheated on your spouse. Yeah, you were addicted to pornography. What do you expect? But we get mad at God, and sometimes it is simply the free will that we have and the consequences of it. Sometimes it's the free will of other people that cause things to get screwed up in our lives. If I'm driving down the road on a motorcycle and I'm safe driving and I got my helmet and all kinds of stuff, and the moron behind me is texting and driving, and they hit me in the back of the motorcycle and kill me, guess what? It's because of their free will and their choice that they made. Well, why didn't God just swoop in and just move the motorcycle? That's just not necessarily how he works. Can he do those things? Yes. Does he do those things? I think sometimes. But sometimes it's just us and them and the bad decisions. When you sit there and think of, and here's one of my things, the hungry, the people that are starving and that don't have a place to stay. You look at a lot of third world countries and you're flipping through the channels and you're like, oh, yeah, okay. So and you just keep on flipping. I got to get to my show. And I'm not asking anybody to raise their hands, but how many of us help either send food or financially support to improve their conditions? Imagine if everybody did. Then would there be starving? Would there be homeless? I tell you what, there's a whole lot of people that could help, and I think we could seriously cut into, if not eliminate, starvation and homeless. But again, he gives us free will to do that. We get free will, we can help people. It's a choice that we have to make. People who abduct children, they have free will. They choose to do that. Well, okay, all right, fine. I get the free will. I get that we can make mistakes and we can make bad decisions and other people can too. But what about tsunamis and earthquakes and all of this other stuff, floods and disease and children being born with disabilities and different things like that? How can he just sit back and do nothing about that? Here's the thing. He did. He did do something. What is that something? We can read in John 3:16. This is Jesus telling, for this is how God loved the world. So he's telling us, the guy who died and rose again, telling us, God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. So many times, we look at our circumstances and we don't look at the cross. Sometimes we are so caught up in the consequences and the things that are going on in the world that are bad and terrible, that we don't look at the cross and the love of God and the fact that he wanted us so badly that he sent his Son to pay our debt on the cross. He did do something. Well, I know you may be saying, no, hold on. But what? I'm a good person. Why did I lose my job? I'm a good person. Why isn't God taking care of me right? Oh, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. Why is he not taking care of me right now? Why is he not looking into my best interest? And I love the question Jordan had at the beginning. Well, why do good things happen to bad people? That doesn't seem fair either. And you're probably like, yeah, that's not fair. Why do good things happen to bad people? God, make the bad things happen to them. All right, let's do some inventory of ourselves for just a minute. Don't raise your hand. This is silent participation. Don't move. I just want you to answer in your brain. Don't let it come out your mouth. All right? Are you a good person? How would you respond to that? Somebody bumps you down the street. Somebody says, are you a good person? If I bump into somebody down the street and they say, are you a good person? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm better than that guy, right? How would you respond? Now, how would you respond to these follow-up questions? Have you ever lied? Ever lied? Not like in 2019. I mean like ever in your life have you ever lied? Have you ever stolen? Have you ever lusted over someone? Have you ever used God's name in an inappropriate way? Have you ever held a grudge? I could go on and on with some of these more detailed questions. But if you answer yes to any of those, in the sight of a perfect God, you are not a good person. I am not a good person. That makes us bad. That makes us sinful. And I know, well, that's not fair. I mean, again, I'm better than that guy. Really? Come on. If you want a just and fair God, I want him to be fair and just and loving. There are consequences to our sins. We make the choice of what we're going to do or not. Luke chapter 18, Jesus says, only God is truly good. Only God is truly good. Romans 3, for everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. And then again in Ephesians chapter 2, but God is so rich in mercy. So again, what did he do about it? Why is he just sitting there? He did. Ephesians 2, but God is so rich in mercy, and he loved us so much that even though we were dead because of our sins, he gave us life when he raised Christ from the dead. It is only by God's grace that you have been saved. I want to repeat that. It is only by God's grace that we have been saved. Yeah, okay, I get it, you saved me, thank you. But what about on this earth? What about now? Why the bad things? Listen, I can't pretend to have all the answers of why bad things happen. But here's some things that I think we can absolutely consider. God is fair and just. Again, there's consequences to our actions. Galatians chapter 6 says, don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. You all have heard reap what you sow, right? You've heard that before. Those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature, that's me, will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature. But those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit. Here's the bottom line. In our present time, on this earth, we are planting seeds. We're planting seeds. And when we come to the end of our life, that is when the harvest begins. And it lasts for eternity. Either we harvest amazing things with God, or we harvest death and decay because of our choices. The second thing to consider, Jesus understands. Jesus understands what you're going through and understands what I am going through. Jesus was the only perfect human being to live on the planet. But yet they crucified him on the cross. They tortured him. Have any of us ever experienced what he went through? I would say no way. Taking all of our sin, you think he deserved that? So he knows what we're going through and more. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, it is said, for God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. He knows. He understands. Here's another thing to consider. God is working. God is doing things. It may not look like we want it to look, but he is working. Romans chapter 8 says, we know that all things, good or bad, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. So you were created on purpose for a purpose. That's right. I love when people start knowing it and repeating it back. We're created on purpose for a purpose. He will take the good things in your life. He will take the bad things in your life and my life. And he will still use them for the purpose that he created you for. He can still use those. And we have to trust that. Because God said so. And why do I believe God? Because Jesus said so. And why do I believe Jesus? Because he predicted his death and he rose again. That's why. Another thing to consider, God knows best. Is it okay for us to just accept the fact that God knows best? Is that possible for us to comprehend? Our kids, younger kids, whether they're nieces, nephews, grandchildren, kids, they think they know best and that we don't have a clue. But we know far more than they know. We understand far more than they'll understand. And we're okay with that with kids. But for a supernatural God who is beyond scientific laws and natural laws, somehow we're on his level or above his level and know better? That's a silly concept. Isaiah 55. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Can we not just accept that fact? Or Job. Job, the guy who had everything taken away from him. Everything. He lost his house. He lost his kids. He lost his crops, his animals. He lost everything. At the end, he says, then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything and no one can stop you. You asked me. Who is it that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? And here's how he responds, Job responds, it is I. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about. So when he was fussing at God for not taking care of his stuff, He finally acknowledged the fact that it's things I knew nothing about and didn't understand. Things far too wonderful for me. Job didn't like it, but he accepted it. The last thing to consider, try and consider an eternal perspective. A lot of how we go through life, we have to consider our perspective. Now, I want you to imagine that this rope represents my life on this earth. This rope represents my life or your life on this earth. This represents one day. One day. Have you ever had a bad day? Anybody? Right? Think about maybe, I'll just pick out an example. High school or middle school. You have this crush on somebody and you're just head over heels in love with them. And y'all even date and kiss. They were my first kiss, right? And then, out of the blue, you break up. They no longer want to be with you. They no longer want to have anything to deal with you. How do you feel in that moment? Crushed, devastated, right? That one day is a terrible, horrible day. Crushed, devastated because of what happened. Why, God? I love them so much. That was my one person. And then adults would come along to that middle school or high school kid and say, listen, that's one person. That's one day. You have this entire life to live. You're going to find someone else. You're okay. How many of us have heard that story or told that to somebody? Does that make their one day better? Do they go, what? That's a good point. I'm good. Yeah. No. Does that make it any less true? It doesn't. It's still the truth. Even in our pain and anguish, it's the truth. Now, let's change this timeline. It no longer represents our life on this earth. But this represents our existence, our life on this earth, to include eternity. Our life on this earth is represented right here. Everything that happens, good or bad, happens here. And we can get bent out of shape and upset about the fact that I lost my dad, or that I experienced a miscarriage, or that my house burnt down and we didn't have insurance, or whatever the case may be. You fill in the blank. And we can shake our fist at God and we can go, why? This is terrible, God. Where are you? And he would come to us and he would say, listen, I know. I've been there. But there's so much more. You have eternity with me, with no pain, with no suffering, experiencing my love for eternity if you choose. We're planting our seeds now. What are we going to choose here determines what happens here. But we get so caught up on here. And we shake our fist at God and say, why? You got it all wrong, but see, we want to fix this. He fixed all of this, all of it. But we don't care and pay attention because we're so stuck in the moment. But he already took care of it. He didn't sit back and do nothing. He loves us, and he sent his son. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. That is why we never give up. Listen, that is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Listen, I want to repeat that. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our eyes, fix our gaze on the things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone. But the things we cannot see will last forever. We long for a better world without pain and suffering, but I am here to tell you that this world will not provide that. There will be pain and suffering, but He provides eternity with no pain and suffering and His everlasting love forever. He loves us, and He knows what He's doing, and we just need to trust Him.